You're about to hear a new story, but first subscribe and leave a like. It helps us grow. Where are you right now? The chandeliers of St. James Palace blazed with 1,000 candles, casting golden light across the faces of London's finest aristocracy as they swirled through yet another tedious winter ball. Lord Sebastian Blackwood, Earl of Ravenscroft, stood near the marble columns that lined the grand ballroom, a glass of champagne growing warm in his hand as he surveyed the glittering scene with barely concealed boredom. At 29, he had attended more balls than he cared to count, danced with more eligible young ladies than he could remember, and deflected more marriage-minded mothers than most men faced in a lifetime. The January cold pressed against the tall windows, frost creating delicate patterns on the glass, but inside the palace the air was thick with perfume, ambition, and the rustle of silk gowns worth more than most Londoners earned in a year. Sebastian's dark eyes scanned the crowd with practiced disinterest, noting the usual players in the endless social theatre of the season. Lady Pemberton was holding court near the refreshment tables, her daughter positioned strategically beside her like a prize mare at auction. The Duke of Westminster was deep in conversation with several members of Parliament, no doubt discussing matters far more interesting than the insipid small talk that filled the rest of the room. The orchestra played a lilting waltz, and couples moved across the polished floor in synchronized patterns that had been perfected over generations of careful breeding and even more careful instruction. Then his eyes found her, and the entire world tilted on its axis. Charlotte Pembroke stood across the ballroom near the terrace doors, her copper-colored hair swept up in an elegant arrangement that revealed the graceful column of her neck. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that complemented her fair complexion perfectly, the bodice cut in the latest fashion with a modest neckline that nevertheless suggested curves beneath. But it wasn't her beauty that made Sebastian's breath catch in his throat, wasn't the way the candlelight seemed to love her skin, or how her smile could illuminate even the darkest corners of any room. It was the way she held her left hand, positioned just so against the folds of her skirt, allowing the light to catch on something that shouldn't be there. A ring. Not just any ring. An engagement ring. Emeralds and diamonds set in gold, unmistakably the crest of the Duke of Thornbury, one of the oldest and most powerful titles in England. Sebastian's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sound that seemed impossibly loud despite the music and conversation. Several guests turned to look, but he barely noticed. His heart was hammering against his ribs so violently he thought it might break through bone. His vision narrowed to a tunnel, focused entirely on that ring, on the way it claimed Charlotte's finger with its weight and significance. "Good God, Blackwood, are you quite all right?" Lord Pemberton, Charlotte's father, appeared at his elbow with concern creasing his weathered face. "You've gone white as a ghost." Sebastian couldn't answer, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the single devastating realization that was crashing over him like a wave of ice water. Charlotte was engaged. Charlotte was going to marry someone else. Charlotte, who had been at his side for 6 years, who knew him better than anyone, who made him laugh and challenged his opinions, and whose presence had become as essential to him as breathing. Charlotte was going to become the Duchess of Thornbury. "I need air," Sebastian managed to choke out, pushing past Lord Pemberton with an abruptness that bordered on rudeness. He strode toward the terrace doors, barely maintaining the appearance of calm that his position demanded. People moved out of his way, sensing something dangerous in his expression, something wild beneath the polished veneer of aristocratic composure. The winter air hit him like a slap when he stepped outside, but he welcomed the cold, needed it to shock some sense back into his reeling mind. The terrace overlooked the palace gardens, now dormant and dusted with frost that glittered like diamonds under the moonlight. His breath came out in white clouds as he gripped the stone balustrade hard enough to hurt, staring blindly at the frozen landscape below. How had this happened? When had it happened? He had seen Charlotte just 3 days ago at the Worthingtons' afternoon tea, and she had seemed perfectly normal. They had discussed the new Tennyson collection, debated the merits of the proposed underground railway expansion, laughed about Lady Ashford's ridiculous new pug. She hadn't mentioned an engagement. She hadn't mentioned Thornbury at all. But then why would she? Sebastian's mind supplied the cruel answer with devastating clarity. You made it perfectly clear, time and time again, that she was nothing more than a friend. You laughed off every insinuation, dismissed every raised eyebrow, denied every spark that flew between you. You were the one who drew that line and refused to cross it. The memory rose unbidden, sharp and painful. Lady Morrison at the Huntington Ball last season, her knowing smile as she watched Sebastian and Charlotte dance. Such chemistry between you two. When shall we expect an announcement? And Sebastian, with that easy, careless laugh that came so naturally. Lady Morrison, you have a romantic imagination. Charlotte is merely my dear childhood friend. Nothing more. Nothing more. He had said those words or variations of them hundreds of times over 6 years. Each time someone suggested there was something between them. Each time a matchmaking mother looked concerned about the amount of time they spent together. Each time his own mother raised her delicate eyebrows and mentioned that perhaps it was time he considered a more suitable match. Suitable. That word had governed his entire life, dictated every choice, drawn boundaries he never thought to question. As the Earl of Ravenscroft, he had responsibilities. His family's lineage stretched back 4 centuries, their name woven into the fabric of English history. He was expected to marry well, to choose a bride who would bring either equal rank or significant fortune to the match. Charlotte, for all her considerable wealth and impeccable education, was only the daughter of a baron. Her title was acceptable, but not exceptional. There were plenty of earls and even dukes with daughters looking for advantageous marriages. So he'd kept her at arm's length, maintained that careful distance even as every fibre of his being had screamed to pull her closer. He had been so proud of his restraint, his adherence to propriety and duty. What a fool he had been. Sebastian? The voice was soft, hesitant, and it sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Is something wrong? He turned slowly, and there she was. Charlotte stood in the terrace doorway, backlit by the golden glow of the ballroom, looking like some ethereal vision from a dream. But this was no dream. This was nightmare made real, because she was more beautiful than ever, and she was wearing another man's ring. When? The word came out harsher than he intended, almost accusatory. Charlotte's green eyes widened slightly, and she stepped fully onto the terrace, closing the door behind her. The sounds of the ball muted, leaving only the whisper of wind through bare branches and the distant sounds of London at night. When what? When did you accept him? Sebastian couldn't stop staring at the ring, at the way the emeralds caught the moonlight. Thornbury. When did you agree to marry him? 6 years earlier, in the spring of 1879, Charlotte Pembroke had arrived in London for her first season, with her heart full of excitement and her head full of romantic notions about what society life would bring. At 17, she was young but not naive, educated but not pedantic, beautiful but not yet aware of the power that beauty could wield. Her father, Baron Hartwell, had ensured she received the finest education available to a young lady: languages, literature, music, art. She could discourse on topics that made other debutantes' eyes glaze over, yet she had also mastered the delicate arts of conversation and social grace that made her a welcome presence in any drawing room. The Pembroke family had taken a house in Mayfair for the season, an elegant Georgian townhouse with a pristine white facade and window boxes that Charlotte's mother immediately filled with early spring flowers. From her bedroom window on the 3rd floor, Charlotte could see across the street to an even grander mansion, the London residence of the Earl of Ravenscroft. She had heard of the Blackwood family, of course. Everyone had. They were old money, old blood, the kind of family that had been present at every significant moment in English history for centuries. What she hadn't expected was that the current Earl's son, Lord Sebastian Blackwood, would be assigned by their families to serve as her escort and guide through her first season. It was a practical arrangement. The Pembrokes and Blackwoods had been neighbours in the country for generations, their estates bordering each other, and though Charlotte's family was of considerably lesser rank, they were considered respectable and, more importantly, wealthy enough to be useful allies. She met him for the first time in her father's study on a warm April afternoon. Charlotte had been nervous, smoothing down her new day dress of pale green muslin over and over as she waited for the introduction. She had expected someone pompous, perhaps even condescending. After all, he was the son of an earl being asked to escort a mere baron's daughter around London society. Then Sebastian Blackwood walked into the room, and every preconceived notion evaporated like morning mist. He was 23 years old, tall and lean with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar, despite obvious attempts to tame it. His eyes were the color of good whiskey, brown with flecks of amber that caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. But it was his smile that undid her, warm and genuine, reaching those remarkable eyes as he bowed over her hand with perfect courtesy. "Miss Pembroke," he said, his voice rich and cultured but with an undercurrent of humor that suggested he didn't take the formalities too seriously. "I hope you'll forgive this rather unusual arrangement. Our mothers apparently believe I'm responsible enough to navigate London society without causing too much scandal, though I assure you that's a matter of some debate." Charlotte found herself laughing, the nervous tension dissolving. "Then perhaps we can cause some minor scandal together, Lord Blackwood. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to keep things interesting." The look he gave her then should have been her first warning. His eyes widened slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, and something passed between them in that moment. Something electric and dangerous and absolutely undeniable. Recognition, perhaps. The sense that they had somehow known each other long before this first meeting. "I think," Sebastian said slowly, "that this season is going to be far more entertaining than I anticipated." He hadn't been wrong. Within a week, they were inseparable. Sebastian called on her daily, took her riding in Hyde Park in the early morning mist, when the fashionable crowd hadn't yet emerged, escorted her to museums and galleries and theatres. They discovered they shared a love of romantic poetry, particularly Keats and Shelley. They debated philosophy over tea, discussed politics during afternoon drives, argued good-naturedly about everything from the best translation of Homer to whether London's notorious fog was atmospheric or merely depressing. What surprised Charlotte most was how easy it all was. She had expected courtship, if one could call it that, to feel forced, artificial, a series of carefully choreographed performances designed to display her accomplishments to best advantage. Instead, being with Sebastian felt like coming home. He made her laugh until her sides ached. He listened when she talked, actually listened, as if her opinions mattered as much as those of the learned men in his club. He challenged her intellectually in ways that her other suitors never did, treating her like an equal rather than a decorative object to be acquired. And the way he looked at her. God, the way he looked at her. The first ball of the season was held at the Duke of Ashford's residence, a magnificent estate in Belgravia, with ballrooms that seemed to stretch on forever. Charlotte wore white, as befitted an unmarried young lady in her first season, but her mother had allowed touches of gold embroidery that caught the light as she moved. She was nervous. Dozens of eyes would be watching her debut into society, judging her every movement, every word. Sebastian was waiting at the bottom of the grand staircase when she descended, and the expression on his face when he saw her made every hour her lady's maid had spent on her hair worthwhile. He looked thunderstruck, frozen in place, his lips slightly parted, as if he'd forgotten how to breathe. "Miss Pembroke," he said when he finally found his voice, bowing formally despite the informal warmth in his eyes. "May I have the honor of the first dance?" Custom dictated that she couldn't dance more than twice with the same gentleman in one evening, lest it suggest an understanding between them. But Charlotte didn't care about custom in that moment. She placed her gloved hand in his and let him lead her onto the dance floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. Dancing with Sebastian was nothing like the lessons she'd endured with her dancing master. The moment his hand settled on her waist, the proper distance maintained but still somehow intimate, Charlotte felt her breath catch. He moved with natural grace, leading her through the steps with confidence, and she followed effortlessly, as if they'd danced together 1,000 times before. "You're doing wonderfully," Sebastian murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "though I'd be lying if I said I was paying attention to your steps." "Oh?" Charlotte looked up at him, pulse quickening. "What are you paying attention to?" "The way the candlelight catches in your hair, the freckle just above your left eyebrow that your powder couldn't quite hide, the fact that you bite your lower lip when you're concentrating." His hand tightened fractionally on her waist, bringing her a breath closer, still proper, but barely. "You're extraordinary, Charlotte Pembroke. I hope you know that." She was melting. That was the only word for it. Melting from the inside out, her bones turning liquid, her heart beating so fast she thought everyone in the ballroom must be able to hear it. This was what the poets wrote about. This was what the novels tried to capture and never quite managed. This feeling of being entirely present and simultaneously transcendent, of the rest of the world fading away until there was only him, only this. The dance ended too soon. Sebastian escorted her off the floor, and immediately a crowd of young men descended, all requesting her dance card. She smiled politely and accepted their invitations, but the rest of the evening passed in a blur. She was going through the motions, saying the right things, dancing with Marques's sons and Earl's nephews, but her attention kept drifting across the ballroom to where Sebastian stood with a group of his friends. She was watching him when Lord Ashford approached Sebastian with a knowing grin. "That Pembroke girl is quite lovely, Blackwood. Should we expect an announcement before the season's out?" Charlotte held her breath, her current dance partner completely forgotten. This was the question that mattered. Sebastian had looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. He had held her closer than propriety strictly allowed. He had complimented her with such sincerity that she had felt beautiful not just on the outside, but all the way through to her soul. Sebastian laughed, that easy, careless sound that came so naturally to him. "Lord Ashford, you have a vivid imagination. Miss Pembroke is merely my dear childhood friend. I'm serving as her escort for the season as a favour to our families. Nothing more." Charlotte felt those words like a physical blow. Nothing more. She missed a step in the dance, stumbling slightly, and had to apologize to her startled partner. Her cheeks burned, not with pleasure now, but with humiliation. How could she have been so foolish? How could she have mistaken courtesy and friendly affection for something deeper? But even as she tried to convince herself that Sebastian's words made sense, that she had simply misread the situation, she couldn't forget the way he had looked at her during their waltz, the heat in his eyes, the way his voice had dropped to that intimate tone, the slight tremor in his hand when he'd placed it on her waist. That night marked the beginning of a pattern that would define the next 6 years of Charlotte's life. Sebastian would look at her as if she was the answer to every question he'd never thought to ask. He would hold her too close during dances, would find excuses to touch her hand, her arm, her back. He would send her books with passages marked, poems that spoke of longing and desire and love that consumed. He would seek out her company constantly, would light up when she entered a room, would make excuses to be alone with her in gardens and libraries and quiet corners of crowded ballrooms, and then every single time someone suggested there was something more between them, he would laugh it off. "Charlotte, she's just my dear friend," as if those heated looks were nothing. As if the tension that crackled between them was imaginary, as if she was simply imagining the way his breath would hitch when they stood too close. Over the following years, Charlotte and Sebastian fell into a rhythm that was both exquisite torture and the most natural thing in the world. Every morning during the season, Sebastian would arrive at her door at precisely 7 o'clock for their rides in Hyde Park. Charlotte would be waiting, dressed in her riding habit of forest green velvet with her copper hair braided down her back, and together they would gallop through the misty morning while the rest of fashionable London still slept. Those morning rides became sacred. In the pale dawn light, with only the sound of hoofbeats and the distant call of birds, they could pretend they were the only two people in the world. Sebastian would challenge her to races along Rotten Row, and Charlotte would laugh as she urged her mare faster, loving the feeling of freedom and the fierce pride in Sebastian's eyes when she beat him. They would slow to a walk in the quieter parts of the park, their horses side by side, and talk about everything and nothing. "Do you ever feel trapped by it all?" Charlotte asked one morning in her second season as they paused near the Serpentine. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the pink-tinged clouds of sunrise. The expectations, the rules, the constant performance. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his gloved hands resting on his saddle's pommel. "Every day," he admitted. "Sometimes I think about what it would be like to just leave, travel to Greece perhaps, or Egypt, somewhere where no one knows the name Blackwood or cares about ancient family obligations." "So, would you really leave?" Charlotte turned to look at him, something like hope fluttering in her chest. "If you could?" He met her gaze, and there it was again, that look that made her feel like she was falling and flying simultaneously. "I think, if I had the right reason to leave, nothing could stop me, but those reasons are remarkably rare." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "We all have our cages, Charlotte. Mine just happens to be gilded." She wanted to say it then, wanted to ask, "What if I were your reason? What if we left together, forgot about society and rank and suitable marriages?" But she couldn't, because every time she gathered the courage to push past that invisible boundary between them, Sebastian would pull back, would remind her with words or actions or carefully placed distance that they were friends, just friends. The seasons blurred together in a pattern of balls and soirees, country house parties and yacht races, theatre performances, and museum exhibitions. Charlotte's dance card was always full. She was considered one of the most desirable young ladies in society, with her beauty, intelligence, and considerable fortune. Proposals came regularly. The Viscount of Hartley asked for her hand in her second season. Lord Pemberton himself requested permission to court her in her third. Even the Earl of Blackwood's cousin made an offer during her fourth season. Charlotte refused them all. She knew it was foolish, knew that with every passing year, society grew more suspicious of her unmarried state. Whispers followed her. What was wrong with her that she couldn't secure a match? Was she too particular, too intellectual? Did she have some hidden flaw that made her unsuitable, despite her obvious attractions? The truth was simpler and far more devastating. She was in love with Sebastian Blackwood, and no other man could compare. He seemed determined to make it worse. During Charlotte's third season, there was an incident at the Huntington estate during a weekend party. A summer storm had rolled in suddenly, while Charlotte was walking in the gardens, and she'd taken refuge in a small folly near the pond. She was examining a shelf of water-damaged books when Sebastian burst through the door, equally drenched. "Charlotte, thank God I saw you head this way before the storm hit and—" He stopped short, taking in the sight of her. The rain had plastered her dress to her body, turned her carefully arranged hair into a tumbling mess of copper curls. Water dripped from her eyelashes. The air in the small space suddenly felt charged with more than just the electricity of the storm. They were alone, completely alone, with rain drumming on the roof and lightning flickering beyond the windows. Sebastian stood frozen in the doorway, his white shirt transparent from the rain, his dark hair slicked back from his face. "You came looking for me," Charlotte said softly. "I always—" Sebastian cleared his throat. "I wanted to make sure you were safe." "I'm safe." She took a step toward him, then another. "Though this is rather improper, isn't it? Us alone like this." "Charlotte." Her name was a warning, or maybe a plea. She couldn't tell. "Do you know how many men have asked to court me?" She took another step. They were only inches apart now. She could see the water droplets caught in his eyelashes, see the rapid pulse in his throat. 8 proposals, Sebastian. 8 men who wanted to marry me. "I know." His voice was hoarse. "I heard about each one." "And did you care?" The words came out more vulnerable than she intended. She was tired of pretending, tired of the careful dance they did around each other. "When you heard that other men wanted me, did it bother you at all?" Sebastian's hands came up to grip her arms, and she thought finally that he was going to pull her close. His eyes were dark, pupils blown wide, fixed on her mouth. "You're the daughter of a baron," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "I'm expected to marry someone of equal or greater rank. It's my duty to my family, to the title—" "Duty?" Charlotte laughed bitterly, pulling away from his grip. "Always duty. Tell me, Sebastian, when you think of duty at night, does it keep you warm? Does it make your heart race? Does it make you feel alive?" "Charlotte, don't—" "Because you make me feel all of those things." She was throwing caution to the wind now, past caring about propriety or pride. "Every day for 3 years, you've made me feel more alive than anyone else ever could. The way you look at me, the way you touch me, the way you seek out my company. Tell me I'm imagining it. Tell me I'm the only one who feels this between us." Sebastian looked torn apart. His hand reached for her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. "You're not imagining it," he whispered. "God help me, you're not imagining anything." Charlotte's heart soared. This was it. This was the moment everything would change. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, and Sebastian stepped back, dropped his hand, moved away so quickly she felt the absence of his warmth like a physical ache. "But it doesn't matter," he said, his voice rough. "What I feel doesn't matter. I have responsibilities, expectations. My mother is already negotiating with the Duke of Hertford about his daughter. It's a good match, an appropriate match. It's what's expected." Charlotte felt something crack inside her chest. "I see." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. "And I suppose I should be grateful that you've made your position clear. No more confusion, no more mixed signals." "Charlotte, no." She held up a hand to stop him. "You're right. This was inappropriate. Thank you for checking on my safety, Lord Blackwood. I think I'll wait here until the rain passes if you don't mind leaving me alone." She turned her back on him, staring blindly at the water-stained books, and after a long, agonizing moment, she heard him leave. Only then did she let the tears come, mixing with the rain still dripping from her hair. That should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment Charlotte gave up, accepted reality, and moved on with her life. But somehow, impossibly, things continued as before. Sebastian still came for morning rides, still danced with her at balls, still sought her out in crowded rooms and made her laugh with his observations, still looked at her like she was something precious, even as he maintained that careful distance. By the spring of 1884, Charlotte Pembroke had reached a breaking point she hadn't realized was coming. She was 22 years old, entering her 6th season, and the whispers had grown louder. "Still unmarried," they said. Must be too particular, or perhaps there's something wrong with her that we don't see. Her mother had stopped asking hopefully about potential suitors. Her father had begun making concerned comments about her future. And Sebastian continued to act as if nothing was wrong, as if 6 years of this exquisite torture was perfectly sustainable, as if Charlotte's heart wasn't breaking a little more every day. It was during a garden party at the Worthington estate that Charlotte finally saw her future with painful clarity. She was standing near the rose garden, pretending to admire the late spring blooms while actually watching Sebastian across the lawn. He was surrounded by a group of debutantes, all giggling and batting their eyelashes, and he was being his usual charming self. But she could see the performance in it now. See how his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. See how his gaze kept drifting across the lawn to find her. "Miss Pembroke?" A deep, cultured voice spoke beside her, and Charlotte turned to find herself looking up at one of the most powerful men in England. Charles Thornbury, the Duke of Thornbury, was 52 years old and had been widowed for 3 years. He was handsome in the way that older men could be, with silver threaded through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. His title was one of the oldest in England, his estates vast, his political influence considerable. He was, by any objective measure, an exceptional match. "Your Grace," Charlotte curtsied appropriately. "I didn't realize you were attending today. Last-minute invitation from Worthington. We have business to discuss regarding some parliamentary matters." He paused, studying her with intelligent grey eyes. "But I find myself far more interested in the roses than in politics at the moment. Might I ask your opinion on the new varieties Lady Worthington has been cultivating?" It was a simple question, a polite conversation starter, but something in his tone suggested it was more than that. This was a man who knew exactly what he wanted and wasn't afraid to pursue it. Charlotte found herself intrigued despite the hollowness in her chest. They walked through the rose garden together, discussing flowers and gardening and eventually more substantive topics. The Duke was well-read, thoughtful, and refreshingly direct. He treated her opinions with respect, listened when she spoke, and challenged her ideas without condescension. "You're not what I expected," Thornbury said, as they paused near a trellis covered in climbing roses. "London society spoke of your beauty and your fortune, but no one mentioned your mind." "Perhaps because most people don't bother to look past the surface," Charlotte replied. "Their loss." The Duke's smile was warm. "Miss Pembroke, I'm aware that I'm considerably older than you and that my reputation as a widower might make this presumptuous, but I would very much like permission to call on you, properly, with your father's blessing." Charlotte's breath caught. This was real. This was a man who wanted her, truly wanted her, not as a friend or a dance partner or someone to make witty conversation with before moving on to his real life. The Duke of Thornbury was offering the kind of interest that led to courtship, to marriage, to a future. She glanced across the lawn and found Sebastian watching them, his expression unreadable, but his body tense. For a moment, she waited for him to stride across the grass, to interrupt, to finally stake some kind of claim. This was his chance, his moment to do something, anything, that indicated he saw her as more than just his dear childhood friend. Sebastian looked away, turning back to his admirers. Charlotte's decision crystallized in that instant. 6 years. She had given him 6 years, and he had given her nothing but confusion and heartache dressed up as friendship. She was done waiting, done hoping, done dying slowly while he kept her suspended in this painful limbo. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said clearly, her voice steady even as her heart cracked. "Please do call on my father." The courtship that followed was everything Charlotte could have asked for, except that it wasn't with the man she loved. The Duke was attentive, generous, respectful. He sent flowers daily, took her driving in his magnificent carriage, escorted her to the theatre and opera. He made his intentions clear from the beginning. He was courting her with marriage in mind. No games, no ambiguity, no painful uncertainty. Charlotte tried to feel something beyond grateful fondness. The Duke was objectively wonderful. He would give her a title beyond anything she could have hoped for, a position of genuine power and influence, estates across England and Scotland, and most importantly, he would give her respect and constancy. He would never make her feel like she was imagining things. He would never deny her in public while burning for her in private. It should have been enough. It wasn't. Sebastian, damn him, noticed everything. "You're seeing a great deal of Thornbury," he commented one morning during their ride in Hyde Park. His tone was carefully casual, but his hands were white-knuckled on the reins. "The Duke has been very attentive," Charlotte replied coolly. Unlike some men, he's clear about his intentions. Charlotte, what, Sebastian? She pulled her horse to a stop and turned to face him directly. What exactly do you want to say? That I shouldn't accept the Duke's courtship? That I should wait around indefinitely for something that's never going to happen? That I should waste the rest of my youth being your dear childhood friend, while you eventually marry some earl's daughter and I grow old and unmarried and pitied? His jaw worked, emotions warring across his handsome face. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Charlotte's voice cracked. Do you have any idea what these 6 years have been like for me? Watching you, wanting you, waiting for you to see me as something other than a convenient companion. You look at me like I matter, like I'm the only woman in the world, and then you laugh it off and tell everyone we're just friends. Do you know how that feels? I can't. Sebastian looked anguished. My family, my duty. Your cage, Charlotte interrupted bitterly. Yes, I remember. You're trapped in your gilded cage, and apparently I'm supposed to be trapped right there with you forever in limbo. She gathered her reins, preparing to leave. Well, I'm done being trapped, Sebastian. The Duke asked my father for permission to propose. I intend to accept. She rode off before he could respond, before she could see his reaction, before she could make the mistake of hoping, yet again, that this would finally be the moment he fought for her. 3 weeks later, Charlotte stood on the terrace of St. James Palace, wearing the Duke of Thornbury's engagement ring, and looking at the man she actually loved with carefully controlled composure. He asked me 2 weeks ago, she said quietly, answering Sebastian's question, at his estate in Hampshire. It was very proper, very respectful. He spoke to my father first, of course. Of course, Sebastian echoed hollowly. He looked like he'd been struck. And you said yes. I said yes. Charlotte's voice was steady, but Sebastian could see her throat working, could see the way her fingers trembled slightly where she held them clasped against her skirts. What else was I supposed to do, Sebastian? Continue waiting for something that was never going to come? You should have told me. The words came out more accusatory than he intended. Before you accepted him, you should have told me you were even considering it. Charlotte laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Why? So you could tell me he's a perfectly suitable match? So you could wish me well and toast my future happiness, or... Her voice dropped dangerously. Or were you hoping for the chance to tell me not to finally, after 6 years, say something that mattered? Sebastian opened his mouth, then closed it. Because what could he say? That seeing that ring on her finger had made him want to tear the world apart? That the thought of her marrying Thornbury, of another man touching her, kissing her, sharing her bed, made him physically ill? That he was realizing, too late, far too late, that he had been a coward and a fool? I thought we had time, he said instead, the words pathetic even to his own ears. Time? Charlotte's eyes flashed with genuine anger now. Time for what exactly? We've had 6 years, Sebastian. 6 years of morning rides and afternoon teas and dances, where you held me just a fraction too close. 6 years of looks and touches and moments that felt like they meant something. And in all that time, not once, did you give me any real indication that you saw me as anything more than a friend. That's not true, isn't it? She took a step closer, and Sebastian could smell her perfume, something floral and delicate that he would recognize anywhere. Tell me then, when Lord Pemberton asked you last year if you had intentions toward me, what did you say? Sebastian flushed. He remembered that conversation, remembered Lord Pemberton's knowing look, the way he'd been clearly giving Sebastian an opening. I told him that you were very dear to me. As a friend, Charlotte finished. You told him I was dear to you as a friend. You told Lady Morrison I was just your childhood companion. You told your own mother that there was nothing between us when she suggested you should either declare yourself or step back. At every single opportunity to claim me, to indicate that I was more to you than a convenient companion, you chose to deny it. Her voice broke slightly. So don't stand here now and act wounded because I finally believed you. The truth of her words hit Sebastian like a physical blow. She was right. She was absolutely right, and he had no defense. He had done this. He had spent 6 years keeping her at arm's length, publicly denying any deeper connection, all because he was too concerned with duty and propriety and what his family expected. Charlotte, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I was wrong. I was a fool and a coward, and I was wrong about everything. But please, don't marry him. Not Thornbury. Not anyone, not yet. Why not? She held up her left hand, letting the emeralds catch the moonlight. He's a duke, Sebastian. A duke. He can give me everything. Title, position, respect. He's kind and intelligent, and he actually wants me. He's not ashamed to be seen with me. He doesn't hide what I mean to him. I'm not ashamed. Then what are you? Charlotte's voice rose slightly. If you're not ashamed, if you're not indifferent, then what exactly have you been for 6 years? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a lot like you wanted to keep me available, keep me in your orbit, without ever having to commit to anything real. You wanted all the benefits of having me in your life without any of the risk or responsibility. That's not... But Sebastian stopped because wasn't it? Hadn't he wanted exactly that? Wanted Charlotte's company, her laughter, her intelligence, her presence, without having to face his mother's disapproval or society's raised eyebrows or his own fears about choosing duty over desire. I'm getting married in 3 months, Charlotte said, and the finality in her voice made Sebastian's chest constrict. The banns will be read, the invitations sent. The Duke has been more than generous, more than patient. He knows... She paused, swallowing hard. He knows that my heart isn't entirely his, but he's willing to give me time, to let affection grow. He says that respect and compatibility are better foundations for marriage than passion anyway. He's wrong. Sebastian moved closer, unable to stop himself. Charlotte, he's wrong. Respect and compatibility are fine, but without passion, without real feeling, without what? She met his eyes directly, her gaze fierce. Without the kind of feeling that makes you deny everything in public, without the kind of passion that's too afraid to speak its name. I've had 6 years of that kind of feeling, Sebastian, and it's left me with nothing but heartache. I love you. The words burst out of him, raw and desperate. God help me, Charlotte, I love you. I've loved you for years, and I was too blind and too stubborn and too afraid to admit it, but I'm admitting it now. I love you. For a moment, Charlotte's composure cracked. He saw it in her eyes, hope and longing, and a love that matched his own. But then she closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were shuttered. You're too late, she whispered. I'm sorry, Sebastian, but you're too late. She turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving Sebastian alone on the terrace with the bitter winter wind and the devastating knowledge that he had lost her through his own cowardice. The days that followed were a special kind of torment that Sebastian had never imagined possible. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on anything beyond the image of Charlotte wearing another man's ring. His friends noticed his distraction. His mother commented on his haggard appearance. Even his valet expressed concern about the amount of brandy disappearing from the study. But Sebastian couldn't bring himself to care. All he could think about was Charlotte. Charlotte laughing at something Thornbury said during a dinner party. Charlotte accepting the Duke's arm for a walk in the park. Charlotte standing in a modiste's shop, being fitted for her wedding trousseau. He tried to stay away. Told himself that the honorable thing to do was to respect her choice, to give her space, to let her build a future with Thornbury. He lasted exactly 3 days before he broke. He found her at Hyde Park during her morning ride, the one ritual she had maintained even after their painful conversation. She was alone, her groom following at a discreet distance, and she looked beautiful in the pale dawn light. Her copper hair was braided in a crown around her head, and she wore a riding habit of deep burgundy that brought out the roses in her cheeks. Charlotte, he called out, urging his horse alongside hers. She didn't look surprised to see him. Sebastian, I wondered how long you'd last. I need to talk to you. We've already talked. But she didn't ride away. That had to mean something. Then, let me grovel. Sebastian kept his horse close to hers as they walked along the path. Let me make a complete fool of myself. I think I've earned the right to do that much. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. You have 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Sebastian had spent the last 3 days composing speeches in his head, practicing arguments, crafting eloquent pleas. Now with Charlotte beside him and dawn breaking over London, all of those careful words deserted him. I've been in love with you since the day we met, he said simply. That first afternoon in your father's study, when you laughed and said we should cause minor scandal together, I fell right then. Every day since has just been me falling deeper. Charlotte's hands tightened on her reins, but she didn't speak. I told myself it was impossible, Sebastian continued. You were a baron's daughter. I was an earl's son. My mother had expectations. Society had rules. I was supposed to marry someone with an equal title, someone who would bring political alliances or significant fortune. Not, he paused, not the most extraordinary woman I'd ever met who just happened to be slightly below my station. How noble of you, Charlotte said, her voice sharp with sarcasm. It wasn't noble. It was cowardly. Sebastian pulled his horse to a stop, and Charlotte did the same. I was terrified, Charlotte, terrified of choosing you and failing, terrified of my family's disapproval, terrified of what it would mean to put love before duty. So I took the coward's path. I kept you close, but never close enough. I had you in my life without having to risk anything real. And now? Charlotte turned to face him fully. What's changed? Your mother's expectations? Society's rules? Your fear? Everything. Sebastian reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. She didn't pull away. Seeing you with that ring changed everything. Realizing I could lose you changed everything. Charlotte, I don't care anymore. I don't care about my mother's opinions or society's expectations or any of it. All I care about is you. That's easy to say now, Charlotte said, but her voice was softer. Now that I'm engaged to someone else, now that there's actually a threat of losing me. But what happens when the novelty wears off? When you realize that choosing me means disappointing your family, means giving up some of the social standing you've always enjoyed? Will you still love me then? Or will you resent me for being the reason you couldn't fulfill your precious duty? It was a fair question, more than fair. Sebastian looked at Charlotte, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman he loved, but the woman he had hurt over and over again with his indecision and cowardice. I would choose you every day, he said quietly. In every circumstance, in every world, I would choose you. And I know you have no reason to believe that after 6 years of me doing the opposite. But Charlotte, if you give me a chance, if you break this engagement and give me one real chance, I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes, but she blinked them back. I'm engaged, Sebastian. I gave Thornbury my word. He's been nothing but kind and honorable, and I won't humiliate him by breaking our engagement just because you finally decided you want me. So that's it? Sebastian's voice cracked. You'll marry him even though you don't love him, even though we love each other. Love isn't always enough. Charlotte pulled her hand from his and gathered her reins. Sometimes it's too late. Sometimes you miss your chance, and all the love in the world can't change that. She rode off, and this time Sebastian let her go. But as he watched her disappear into the morning mist, he made a decision. He had been passive for 6 years, had let fear and duty guide his choices. No more. If Charlotte thought he was going to give up that easily, she was about to learn just how stubborn Sebastian Blackwood could be when he finally knew what he wanted. The Duke of Thornbury hosted a dinner party a week later, and Sebastian received an invitation that he knew was a test. Could he be civilized? Could he sit through an evening watching Charlotte play hostess beside her future husband? The smart thing would be to decline, to maintain his distance, to let the situation cool. Sebastian accepted immediately. The Duke's London residence was a palatial mansion in Belgravia, all gleaming marble and priceless artwork and centuries of aristocratic privilege. Sebastian arrived deliberately late, timing his entrance for maximum impact. Charlotte was already there, looking stunning in a gown of midnight blue silk with sapphires at her throat, a gift from Thornbury, no doubt. The Duke himself stood beside her, silver-haired and distinguished, the picture of appropriate masculine pride. Lord Blackwood, Thornbury greeted him with perfect courtesy. I'm delighted you could join us. Your Grace, thank you for the invitation. Sebastian bowed appropriately, then turned to Charlotte. Miss Pembroke, you look exquisite this evening. Charlotte's eyes flashed a warning. Lord Blackwood, how kind of you to say so. The dinner itself was exquisite torture. Sebastian was seated across from Charlotte, and 3 seats down, close enough to watch her every expression, but too far for private conversation. The Duke was an excellent host, keeping conversation flowing smoothly among the assembled aristocrats. And Charlotte was perfect, charming, intelligent, gracious, everything a duchess should be. But Sebastian knew her too well. He saw the tightness around her eyes when the Duke's hand covered hers on the table, saw the way she flinched just slightly when Thornbury mentioned their upcoming wedding, saw the moment her gaze found his across the table and held everything she wasn't saying written in those green eyes. After dinner, the men retired to Thornbury's study for port and cigars, while the ladies withdrew to the drawing room. Sebastian endured 20 minutes of political discussion before making his excuses, claiming he needed air. He knew the layout of these grand houses. They were all variations on a theme. The ladies would be in the main drawing room. Charlotte, if he knew her at all, would find a reason to slip away. He found her in the library, standing by the window that overlooked the garden. She didn't turn when he entered, but her shoulders tensed. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Probably not. Sebastian closed the door behind him. But I've spent 6 years doing what I should. I'm done with that. Sebastian, do you love him? The question came out more aggressive than he intended. "The Duke! Do you love him?" Charlotte finally turned to face him. "I respect him. I admire him. He's been nothing but kind and generous." "That's not what I asked." Sebastian crossed the room, unable to maintain his distance. "Do you love him the way I love you? Does your heart race when he enters a room? Do you lie awake at night thinking about him? Does he make you feel alive in a way nothing else does? That's not fair. None of this is fair." Sebastian's control snapped. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't know I wasted 6 years, that I hurt you over and over, that I have no right to ask anything of you now? I know all of that, Charlotte, but I'm asking anyway, because I can't stand here and watch you marry someone else without fighting for you." "You had 6 years to fight for me," Charlotte shot back, her own composure cracking. 6 years where a single word from you could have changed everything. Where were all these passionate declarations then? "I was being an idiot." Sebastian grabbed her hand, the one wearing Thornbury's ring, and held it between them. "I was so concerned with duty and propriety that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I kept telling myself that there would be time, that eventually I would figure out a way to have both you and my family's approval. But there isn't time, is there? Life doesn't wait for us to get our priorities straight." Charlotte tried to pull her hand away, but Sebastian held firm. "Let me go. Not until you tell me the truth." He pulled her closer, close enough that he could see the rapid pulse in her throat, could see her pupils dilate. "Tell me you don't love me. Tell me that what you feel for Thornbury is real and deep and enough. Tell me that, and I'll walk away. I'll attend your wedding and toast your happiness and never bother you again." For a moment, Charlotte looked like she might actually tell him those things. Then her eyes closed, and a single tear traced down her cheek. "You know I can't," she whispered. "You know I love you. I've loved you for 6 years through all the denials and all the hurt. But Sebastian, love isn't enough. Not this time. Then what is enough?" His voice broke. "What do I have to do? Tell me, and I'll do it." "There's nothing you can do." Charlotte opened her eyes, and the pain in them nearly destroyed him. "I gave Thornbury my word. The engagement has been announced. The wedding plans are made. Breaking it off now would humiliate him and create a scandal that would follow both of us for years. Is that really what you want? For us to start our life together under a cloud of gossip and dishonor?" "I don't care about gossip." "But I do." Charlotte pulled her hand free finally, wrapping her arms around herself. "I care about doing the right thing. I care about keeping my word. The Duke is a good man, Sebastian. He doesn't deserve to be humiliated because we finally figured out what we should have known years ago." Sebastian felt like the floor was crumbling beneath his feet. "So you're really going to do it? You're going to marry him?" "I have to." Charlotte's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, but I have to." They stood there in the library, close enough to touch but separated by a chasm of missed chances and broken promises. Then the door opened, and the Duke of Thornbury stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "Lord Blackwood," he said calmly, "I believe you've had sufficient air. Perhaps it's time you rejoined the gentleman." The scandal came not from Charlotte or Sebastian, but from Sebastian himself, and it was spectacular. 2 nights after the dinner at Thornbury's residence, at a ball hosted by the Duchess of Ashford, the Duke of Thornbury stood to make a toast to his beautiful bride-to-be. Charlotte stood beside him, wearing the emerald engagement ring and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Sebastian, who had been drinking steadily throughout the evening, stood as well. "Forgive me," Sebastian said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "But I won't sit here and let this happen without speaking." "Sebastian, don't—" Charlotte's face had gone pale. But Sebastian was past caring about propriety or scandal, or anything except the desperate need to stop this wedding. "Everyone here knows that Charlotte Pembroke is about to become the Duchess of Thornbury. It's an excellent match by all objective measures. The Duke is wealthy, powerful, respectable. Everything society could wish for." He paused, swaying slightly. "Everything except love." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. The Duke's expression remained neutral, but his jaw tightened. Charlotte looked horrified. "I've known Charlotte for 6 years," Sebastian continued. 6 years of telling everyone, telling her, that she was just my childhood friend. 6 years of denying what was obvious to anyone with eyes. 6 years of being a coward. He turned to look directly at Charlotte, his heart laid bare. "I love you. I've always loved you. And watching you marry someone else would kill me slower than any blade ever could." "Lord Blackwood," the Duke said, his voice icy, "you're making a spectacle of yourself and embarrassing my fiancée." "I know." Sebastian didn't look away from Charlotte. and I'm sorry for that, but I'd rather make a spectacle now than live the rest of my life regretting my silence." Charlotte's eyes were brimming with tears. "This is exactly what I didn't want," she said, her voice shaking. "This scene, this scandal." "I know," Sebastian said again, "but I'm done caring about scandal. I'm done caring about what people think or what's appropriate or what my duty demands. All I care about is you, Charlotte. And if there's even a chance, the smallest chance, that you'll choose me instead of him, then humiliating myself in front of all of London society is a small price to pay." The ballroom was absolutely silent. Every eye moved between Sebastian, Charlotte, and the Duke, waiting to see how this drama would resolve. Finally, Charlotte spoke. "Get out," she said, her voice low and furious. "Get out before you make this worse than it already is." Sebastian felt those words like a physical blow. He looked at her, at the anger and hurt and betrayal in her eyes, and realized he had miscalculated catastrophically. He had thought that a public declaration would somehow break through her resistance, would make her see that he was finally serious. Instead, he had just humiliated her in front of everyone who mattered in their social world. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely, but the damage was done. He left the ballroom with hundreds of eyes watching him go, with whispers already starting to spread. By tomorrow, all of London would be talking about how the Earl of Ravenscroft had drunkenly declared his love for another man's fiancée. Charlotte's reputation would be tainted by association. The Duke would be seen as a cuckold, unable to control his own bride. Sebastian had tried to fight for Charlotte, but all he'd done was make everything worse. Charlotte found him 3 days later in the gardens of his family's estate in Mayfair, sitting on a bench beneath an oak tree that had witnessed too many of their private conversations. She appeared like a ghost in the morning mist, wearing a simple day dress of pale grey that made her look ethereal and impossibly sad. "I didn't think you'd come," Sebastian said, not rising from the bench. He looked terrible, unshaven, dishevelled, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep and too much brandy. "I shouldn't have." Charlotte remained standing, maintaining distance between them. "But we need to talk about what happened." "I know." Sebastian finally looked at her directly. "I know I ruined everything. I humiliated you, embarrassed Thornbury, created exactly the kind of scandal you wanted to avoid. I'm sorry, Charlotte, I am so desperately sorry." "Why did you do it?" Her voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Why, after I specifically told you I couldn't break the engagement, did you make that scene?" "Because I was desperate." Sebastian stood, but didn't move closer. "Because watching you pledge yourself to another man was killing me, and I thought, foolishly, that if I made my feelings public, if I forced the issue, somehow it would change things." He laughed bitterly. "Instead, I just proved that you were right all along. So I'm still the same coward I've always been, except now I'm a coward who destroys everything he touches." Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "The Duke came to see me yesterday." Sebastian's chest tightened. "To break the engagement? I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't blame you either if you never spoke to me again." "No." Charlotte took a breath. "He came to tell me that I was free to make my own choice." Sebastian's head snapped up. "What?" "He said," Charlotte's voice wavered slightly, "he said that he entered this courtship knowing my heart wasn't entirely his, that he had hoped affection would grow in time. But watching me at that ball, watching my reaction to your declaration, he realized something. A marriage without love is a prison for both parties, and he wouldn't do that to me or to himself." Hope, dangerous and terrifying, bloomed in Sebastian's chest. "So, the engagement is over." Charlotte showed him her left hand. The emerald ring was gone. He broke it quietly, privately, told society that after careful consideration, we decided we weren't well suited. He's taking the blame for it, saying it was his decision to protect my reputation. Her eyes filled with tears. "He's a better man than either of us deserves." "Charlotte," Sebastian took a step toward her. "No." She held up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish. The Duke gave me freedom, but Sebastian, I don't know what to do with it. These last few days have been hell. You humiliated me, embarrassed the Duke, created a scandal that will follow us for months. And yes, your declaration was romantic and passionate, but it was also selfish. You didn't think about what I wanted, didn't consider the consequences. You just acted on your own desperate impulses." "You're right." Sebastian felt his last hopes crumbling. "You're absolutely right, and I have no excuse. But," Charlotte's voice broke, "but despite all of that, despite the scandal and the hurt and the complications, I still love you. God help me, Sebastian Blackwood, I still love you. And I don't know whether that makes me the most foolish woman in London or the most hopeful." Sebastian couldn't breathe. What are you saying? I'm saying that if we do this, if we try to make this work, it has to be different from before. Charlotte moved closer, her green eyes fierce. No more denials, no more hiding what we mean to each other, no more putting duty or society's expectations ahead of us. If you want me, Sebastian, you have to really want me. Publicly, permanently, consequences be damned. I do want that. Sebastian closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. Charlotte, I want exactly that. I want to court you properly, with your father's blessing and society's knowledge. I want to dance with you at balls and not care who's watching. I want to marry you and spend every day for the rest of my life, making up for the 6 years I wasted. My father will probably refuse at first, Charlotte warned. After the scandal, then I'll convince him, I'll grovel, I'll plead, I'll do whatever it takes. Sebastian took her hands in his, the absence of that emerald ring the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. I'll prove to him and to you and to all of London that I'm serious, that you're not just some passing fancy, but the woman I intend to spend my life with. Charlotte searched his face, looking for something, reassurance, sincerity, proof that this time was different. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because slowly, carefully, she smiled. Then you should probably start by kissing me, she said. Properly. Not like we're afraid someone will see. 6 years is a long time to wait for a first kiss. Sebastian didn't need to be told twice. He pulled Charlotte into his arms and finally, kissed the woman he loved. It was everything he had imagined over 6 years of stolen glances and almost moments. Charlotte's lips were soft and sweet, her body fitting perfectly against his, her arms wrapping around his neck as if she never intended to let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he whispered. I'll say it 1,000 times a day if I have to. I love you, Charlotte Pembroke, and I'm done being ashamed or afraid of that. I love you too, Charlotte replied, tears streaming down her face now, but they were happy tears. Even though you're an idiot who took 6 years too long to figure it out. The biggest idiot in all of England, Sebastian agreed. But I'm your idiot if you'll have me. I'll have you, Charlotte said, pulling him down for another kiss. God help me, but I'll have you. The wedding of Lord Sebastian Blackwood, Earl of Ravenscroft, to Miss Charlotte Pembroke, took place on a perfect spring morning 3 months later at St. George's Church in Mayfair. Society had recovered from the scandal with surprising speed. There was simply too much genuine affection between the couple for the gossips to maintain their outrage. Even Sebastian's mother, initially horrified by the broken engagement and public spectacle, had been gradually won over by Charlotte's grace and intelligence. The Duke of Thornbury had sent his blessing along with a generous wedding gift, proving himself to be exactly the gentleman he had always appeared. I hope you'll be as happy as you both deserve, his note had said, and Lord Blackwood, take better care of her than I would have. She deserves nothing less than complete devotion. Now, as Sebastian stood at the altar watching Charlotte walk down the aisle on her father's arm, he felt his heart might burst from his chest. She was breathtaking in white silk and Brussels lace, her copper hair crowned with orange blossoms, her green eyes locked on his with absolute certainty. This was real, this was happening. After 6 years of denial and cowardice, Charlotte Pembroke was about to become his wife. The ceremony passed in a blur of Latin and vows and the exchange of rings, a simple gold band that Sebastian had chosen himself, with an inscription inside that read, "Finally yours." When the vicar finally pronounced them man and wife, Sebastian kissed Charlotte with all the passion he had suppressed for 6 years, earning a few scandalized gasps and several knowing chuckles from the assembled guests. "You're mine now," he murmured against her lips. "Legally, publicly, irrevocably mine." "And you're mine," Charlotte replied, her smile radiant. "Which means no more denying it, no more calling me your childhood friend." "Never again," Sebastian promised. "From now on, you're Lady Blackwood, my wife, the love of my life, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." The wedding breakfast was held at the Blackwood estate, a sprawling affair with hundreds of guests and enough champagne to float a small ship. Sebastian couldn't take his eyes off Charlotte as she moved through the crowd, greeting well-wishers and accepting congratulations with her natural grace. She was his. After everything, against all odds, Charlotte was finally, completely his. As the afternoon turned to evening and the guests began to depart, Sebastian found Charlotte standing in the gardens where they had shared so many private conversations over the years. She was looking up at the oak tree where he had proposed, properly on his knees, with a ring and a speech about how he intended to spend the rest of his life making her happy. Thinking about all the time we wasted? Sebastian asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. Actually, no. Charlotte leaned back against him, her head resting on his shoulder. I was thinking about all the time we have ahead of us, a whole lifetime of morning rides and evening dances and debates about poetry. Except now. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining. Now we get to end each day in the same bed. Now I get to wake up beside you every morning. Now there's no more distance, no more denial, no more pretending. No more pretending, Sebastian agreed, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. Just us, being exactly what we've always been. And what's that? Charlotte asked, even though she already knew the answer. Desperately, completely, irrevocably in love. Sebastian swung her up into his arms, making her laugh. Now shall we begin our wedding night? I have 6 years of restraint to make up for, and I intend to be very thorough about it. Charlotte's laughter echoed through the gardens as Sebastian carried her toward the house, toward their future, toward everything they should have had years ago, but were finally brave enough to claim. 3 years had transformed Sebastian and Charlotte's life in ways neither of them could have imagined on that desperate winter night when everything had nearly fallen apart. Now in the spring of 1888, Lady Charlotte Blackwood, Countess of Ravenscroft, walked through the gardens of Kensington Palace with her husband and their daughter, Helena, who at 18 months old had already proven herself to be as headstrong and intelligent as her mother. Helena had Sebastian's dark curls and Charlotte's green eyes, and she was currently determined to chase every butterfly in the garden, despite her parents' best efforts to keep her on the path. Charlotte laughed as Sebastian scooped up their squealing daughter before she could tumble into a flower bed. She has no fear, Sebastian said, settling Helena on his hip, just like her mother. I had plenty of fear, Charlotte corrected, linking her arm through Sebastian's free one as they continued their walk. I was terrified for years that you'd never see what was right in front of you, but you were brave enough to move on, Sebastian said, his tone serious despite Helena's attempts to grab his nose. Brave enough to accept Thornbury, to force my hand. If you hadn't done that, if you just waited indefinitely, I might never have woken up. Charlotte squeezed his arm. We both made mistakes, but we found our way back to each other. That's what matters. They walked in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Helena point excitedly at a particularly large butterfly. The spring afternoon was perfect, warm without being hot, the gardens in full bloom, the scent of lilacs and roses perfuming the air. London stretched out around them, bustling and alive, but in this moment they were in their own private world. Do you remember this bench? Charlotte asked as they approached a weathered stone seat beneath a flowering cherry tree. Pink petals drifted down like snow. Of course. Sebastian's voice was rough with emotion. Our 3rd season, the summer party. This is where you almost kissed me and then pulled away at the last second, Charlotte finished. I cried for an hour afterward. I was an idiot. Sebastian set Helena down to toddle around the bench, keeping a watchful eye on her. Then he pulled Charlotte into his arms, right there in the public gardens where anyone might see. But I'm not an idiot anymore. He kissed her deeply, thoroughly, in a way that made it absolutely clear they were married and in love, and not the least bit ashamed of showing it. When they finally broke apart, Charlotte was breathless and pink-cheeked. Still making up for lost time, she teased. Always. Sebastian tucked a strand of copper hair behind her ear. Every day for the rest of our lives, I'm making up for lost time. Though I have to say, the time we're spending together now is pretty extraordinary. Mama, Papa! Helena's imperious voice demanded attention, and they turned to find her pointing at the butterfly she'd finally managed to corner against the bench. Yes, darling, it's beautiful, Charlotte said, crouching down to her daughter's level. But we have to let it go. Butterflies need to be free. As if understanding, Helena waved her chubby hand at the butterfly, and it flew away in a flutter of yellow wings. The little girl clapped with delight, and Sebastian swept her up again, spinning her until she shrieked with laughter. Charlotte watched them with a full heart. Her husband and her daughter, the 2 people she loved most in the world, here in the gardens, where her heart had broken and mended so many times. Life hadn't been easy. There had been struggles with Sebastian's mother, who still occasionally made pointed comments about Charlotte's relatively modest origins. There had been gossip that took months to die down. There had been moments when Charlotte wondered if they'd made a terrible mistake. But then there were moments like this, moments where Sebastian looked at her like she was the answer to every question, moments where their daughter laughed with pure joy, moments where Charlotte felt so completely loved and cherished that the difficult times seemed like nothing more than storm clouds that had passed. "What are you thinking about?" Sebastian asked, settling Helena on his shoulders where she could reach the cherry blossoms. "That it was worth it," Charlotte said simply. "All of it. The 6 years of waiting, the heartbreak, the scandal. It was all worth it to get to this." Sebastian's eyes softened. "You know what I think about." "What?" "That I almost lost you." His voice was serious now. "That if Thornbury hadn't been a better man than I deserved, if he hadn't released you from that engagement, I would have spent the rest of my life watching you from a distance and dying slowly from it." Charlotte moved closer, careful not to disturb Helena, who was now trying to grab cherry blossoms. "But he did release me, and I chose you, and here we are." "Here we are," Sebastian echoed. He shifted Helena to one arm and pulled Charlotte close with the other, the three of them standing together beneath the cherry tree, with petals falling around them like blessings. "My family, my whole world." "You're getting sentimental in your old age, Lord Blackwood," Charlotte teased even as she blinked back tears. "I'm 29, he protested. "Ancient," she said solemnly. Then, more seriously, "Do you ever regret it? Marrying beneath your station, dealing with your mother's disappointment, all the complications I brought into your life." Sebastian looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "Charlotte, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. You challenged me, changed me, made me a better man than I would have been otherwise. If I could go back and change anything, it would only be to have the courage to claim you 6 years earlier." "Maybe we needed those 6 years," Charlotte mused. "Maybe we both needed to grow up a little, to figure out what really mattered. Maybe," Sebastian kissed the top of her head, "or maybe I was just a coward who got extremely lucky that the woman he loved was patient enough to wait for him to figure things out." Helena chose that moment to declare herself done with cherry blossoms and demanded to be taken to see the swans on the pond. As they walked toward the water, Helena chattering away in her toddler language, and Sebastian responding as if he understood every word, Charlotte felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was her life now. Not the life she'd imagined at 17, when she'd thought society and romance would be simple and straightforward. Not the life she'd resigned herself to when she'd accepted Thornbury's proposal, but a life she had chosen, had fought for, had nearly lost, and then found again. A life with a man who loved her completely, without reservation or shame. A life with a daughter who would grow up knowing that love was worth fighting for. A life that had been worth every moment of heartache to achieve. "I love you," she said suddenly, stopping Sebastian on the path. "I don't say it enough, but I love you so much it sometimes feels like my chest can't contain it." Sebastian's smile was brilliant. "I know exactly what you mean." He kissed her again, gentle and sweet this time, with Helena giggling above them. "I love you too, Charlotte. I always have. I always will." "Always," Charlotte agreed, and in that moment, beneath the spring sky with her family around her, she believed in always, believed in forever, believed that sometimes if you were brave enough and lucky enough, love really could conquer everything, even 6 years of cowardice, a broken engagement, and all the complications that society could throw at you. They were proof of that, living, breathing, laughing proof that true love, when finally acknowledged and fought for, was worth everything. And as they walked toward the pond with Helena pointing excitedly at the swans, Charlotte sent a silent thank you to whatever force in the universe had given her the strength to move on, had given Sebastian the courage to fight for her, and had given them both the chance to build this beautiful, complicated, perfect life together. 6 years of waiting. 3 months of scandal, 3 years of marriage, and a lifetime of love still ahead of them.